brothers and sisters in Dhamma, I invite you to take 30 seconds to have your mobile phone connect to silent mode. Thank you. We are privileged to have with us here Venerable Nada as our speaker for today under the K3 Dhammananda Lecture Series 2014. Reverend is born in New Zealand in 1960. Bante Nanadhaja grew up in Australia and spent his teenage years under the influence of drugs, rock and roll, and motorbike gangs and pioneers in violence. At 19, living a hippie lifestyle, he left New Zealand, wandering through places like Indian wedding, experiments with spirituality. While in India, he met the Dalai Lama and listened to the Dhamma from his holiness, and eventually found his way to Thailand, where he studied meditation under Ajahn Sri Mangalalo of the Tropical Insight Meditation Center in Chiang Mai. He soon found his calling to become a monk, and at the age of 50, Bante Nanadhaja was ordained as a Theravada monk under Dr. Saigo Sunanda. Bante Nanadhaja aspires to open a meditation and Dhamma center in New Zealand one day. Besides Dhamma talks, Bante Nanadhaja is also an experienced teacher of meditation. As we are always facing with a lot of ups and downs in life, as well as we have been many times we'll be facing with a lot of difficulties in life whereby our patience runs thin. As a one of it in daily life, as those who are living in fear, we always face with the problem of prayer. That's the time all our impatience comes up, even though how much we study about impatience. And today, Bhante will be giving on the talk on the instruction of the Buddhas, patience and noble guidance from the Mahatma 183 to 184. Bhante, I will pass the mic over to you now.
Okay, we start by paying homage to the Buddha and saying Namo Tassa Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Buddham Saranam Gacchami Dhammam Saranam Gacchami Sangham Saranam Gacchami Tutiyampi Buddham Saranam Gacchami Tutiyampi Dhammam Saranam Gacchami Tutiyampi Sangham Saranam Gacchami Tatiyampi Buddham Saranam Gacchami Tatiyampi Dhammam Saranam Gacchami Tatiyampi Sangham Saranam Gacchami Anadipata Veramani Sikaparam Samadhiyami Adinadana Veramani Sikaparam Samadhiyami Kamisu Vicaca Veramani Sikaparam Samadhiyami Musawada Veramani Sikaparam Samadhiyami Sura Veraya Marja Pamadana Dhamma verses 183, 184 and 185. So these verses are in response to questions raised by Venerable Ananda to the Buddha. So first of all, I'm going to look at the instructions of the Buddhas. Dhammapada, verse 183. Sabba papasa akaranam kusalasa upasampada sachita pariyadapanam etam buddha sasanam. Abandoning all unwholesome actions, generating and maintaining wholesome actions, purifying and disciplining one's own mind. This is the teachings of the Buddhas. Now, it's important, first of all, that we note here the plural, the teaching of the Buddhas, not the teachings of the Buddha. This is a very, very pertinent point. So please try and keep in mind that we're talking about the 6 previous Buddhas that we know the Buddha actually met with over lifetimes, plus the present Buddha Shakyamuni. So that's the important thing to remember as we're looking at 7 Buddhas here, the teaching of 7 Buddhas. I'm often told by people or asked by people maybe, do I think that Buddhism needs to modernize to suit today's society? I'm never quite sure what people mean by modernizing Buddhism. I've heard a few suggestions, not all of them bad. Occasionally I hear that the monks could learn to smile more. Yeah, they probably could. Some monks just don't like to smile, And I don't think there's actually anything wrong with a monk smiling. I know there is a rule in the Vinaya about how big a smile a monk should have on his face. I guess the lay people were worried that if the monks were running around with too big a smile, they were probably telling jokes and stuff and having a bit of a laugh. And when the lay people are busy giving alms to the monks, for the monks to live the holy life, I guess they don't want the monks sitting around having joke-telling sessions. And so there isn't a rule about laughter and about how much of your teeth you can show when you're actually smiling. But it doesn't say that monks aren't allowed to smile, you know. And I'm actually quite surprised sometimes when I see the look on some monks' faces. They look so serious. And I think to myself, but hang on a minute. Surely you understand that the Buddha taught how we can have happiness. You know? And if you know the truth about happiness, why would you look so miserable? You know? It is okay to smile. But as I say, I often hear this, Buddhism needs to modernize. But we see in this verse here that the last 7 Buddhas teach the same thing. To avoid unwholesome actions, to cultivate and maintain generous actions, and to purify the mind. And, you know, if I were to watch the news on television, I don't have a television by the way, but if I watch the news on the television, I'm quite sure it would be all about human suffering, misery, famine, war, unemployment, hunger. And so I would have to say that the suffering today is no different to the suffering in the previous Buddha's days. People were still leading stressful lives. I mean, heck, ours might be even more stressful these days, you know. I mean, you know, yourselves, you're all lay people. And you've got to go out, you've got to try and earn a living. I believe now, I don't know if they've done it yet, but I believe that your government is going to impose a GST tax at some stage. You know? We've got this in New Zealand, they call it grab, steal and take. You know? Because it's just extra money coming out of our pockets. We work hard during the week, scrape enough money together to pay the mortgage, put the kids in school, get their school uniforms, buy their books, feed them. Sometimes they want to go to the movies. I don't know what that costs here in Malaysia, but I'm sure it's not that cheap. As they get to the movies, they want to have some popcorn, some drinks. You're not allowed to take your own popcorn and drinks into the cinemas because you can buy it cheaper outside than what you can buy it in there. You know? And so, for lay people, life is a struggle, you know, just meeting your weekly needs. And then you have a government that goes and introduces GST just to take a little bit more out of your pocket. And so, we can see that there's a lot of suffering in the world today. As I say, you know, there are wars, revolutions, or whatever they want to call it, taking place across the Arab world, in countries like Syria, countries like Egypt, you know, where people are fighting for basic freedoms and being crushed by dictatorships, being put down by the military. And so we can see that there's a lot of suffering. And so I often think Buddhism doesn't need to modernize itself for society, but society has to come back to the teachings of the Buddha. You know? I mean, If we start modernising Buddhism, the question is, where do we stop? You know, people will say the Buddha said it was okay to get rid of the minor rules if the Sangha agreed to it. Well, at the first Buddhist council, they couldn't agree to it, you know. I mean, I don't know, you get 500 arahants together, you know, they don't know the difference between major and minor, so they just left the whole lot in place, you know. But then, if we start to modernise Buddhism, we do have to be very careful, because you get rid of one rule, and you change one rule, and then you start thinking, well, why don't I change this rule as well? And I might as well go and change that rule. And you end up with the monks not living by any rules, and then they become no different to lay people. And you're no longer going to have Buddhism taught. And I heard somebody say once it was going to end up, you'd recognise a monk because he'd have a piece of orange or brown cloth tied around his arm to signify that he was a monk. You know? So you'd know when you were sitting in the pub, that was a monk you were having a beer with. And this is what happens, you know. I hear people say that, you know, monks should grow their own food, cook their own food. And this is something that the Buddha forbid the monks from doing, because the monks would go out on alms round each day. We're not even allowed to store food overnight. So we're not events to store food overnight, because the monks, and you still see this in countries where the religion is predominantly Buddhist. You still see the monks going out on alms rounds in the morning. It's a little bit more difficult in a place like Malaysia. Monks might have to go quite a long distance to find themselves in a small Buddhist neighbourhood, for instance. But we have the laity that come into the temple, and they bring the food in. I've got to say, it's always very nice food that you bring here. And they take care of the monks. If the monks were growing their own food and preparing their own food, then we're taking away an opportunity for the laity to come and to make merit. And this is something that the Buddha always encouraged the lay people to do. It's one way that they can make merit is by coming to the temples, coming to the monasteries, and giving Dhamma. So if monks start cooking for themselves, then that takes away an opportunity for the laity to give. But a lot of people think that it's an imposition on the laity, and I try to tell them that the laity isn't forced to come to the temple. The laity isn't forced to put food into our alms bowl. The laity do this because the laity want to do this. One of the reasons why we can't grow our own food is because of the precept not to harm any living beings. You see, we take the precept, we often say, I take the training rule to abstain from killing. But of course we have a tendency to say to refrain from harming all sentient beings. Now, we know that, to hurt or to kill, there has to be intention behind the act. We have to intend to kill the being. But for the monks, we're not allowed to turn the soil, because we understand that when we turn the soil, we can take beings that are supposed to live underground, and we place them on the surface where there's too much heat, too much sun, and they should often die. We take beings that are supposed to live on the surface and we bury them, and they also die, they suffocate. And so, people say, monks should grow their own food. They're not allowed to. And if we decided that we're going, start to grow our own food, then why not cook our own food? So that takes away that opportunity for the laity. And as I say, the more you start to play with the rules, then the more rules you tend to want to get rid of. So, well, that didn't harm things, so let's let this one slide as well. And some of the rules, they're actually probably more applicable to the Buddha's time and to a geographic location. So you do see, we do modernise. If you go to Europe, if you go to Britain, and even the United States of America, and you see the monks who are doing alms rounds, in the winter time they wear shoes. Now the Vinaya actually says that monks shouldn't be wearing shoes outside the temple. And a lot of people say we're not supposed to wear it while we do Pindabat, while we're on alms round. But the actual Vinaya says unless a monk is sick, he should not wear shoes in an inhabited area. Although these days you tend to see monks wearing their flip-flops when they go into town or something like that. But you will see it in Europe, you will see it in the United States, because a monk trying to do alms rounds barefoot in the snow is going to get very ill very quickly. So there's flexibility to a degree in the Vinaya. But as I say, to try and modernise the Vinaya too much, you end up with no Vinaya whatsoever. Yes, it would probably be very easy if, when the Buddha first ordained monks, they were on 5 precepts. And I'm quite sure that life would be a lot easier if we were on 5 precepts. But being a monk isn't actually about having an easy life. It's about being a renunciate. And so we can see that the concept of modernising Buddhism can be a bit dangerous. We are still subject to birth, aging, sickness and death. So, take a closer look at this verse now. So the first part of the verse is about abandoning all unwholesome karma. And of course, unwholesome karma comes into being due to unwholesome thoughts. And people often say it's the unwholesome deeds that we do, the unwholesome speech that we do, that creates unwholesome karma. But without unwholesome thoughts, there would not be any unwholesome deeds, there would not be any unwholesome speech. So we have to be very careful of our thoughts. We need to abandon unwholesome thoughts. So then the next one is to generate and maintain wholesome thoughts. Now you'll notice, a lot of versions of the Dhammapada, especially in the English versions, it says, avoid all evil. Buddha didn't actually talk about evil, he spoke about unwholesome and wholesome. Evil is more of a Christian or not necessarily because we're a Christian, but a concept of a religion that has a God in it. And of course we don't have a God in Buddhism. And so that's why I don't say avoid all evil. And in actual fact, we can't avoid all evil because it's around us. Unless you actually become a monk and go and hide in the forest it's not possible to avoid evil. You will see people doing unwholesome actions around us all the time. And so it's actually not possible to avoid all evil. But we can abandon unwholesome thoughts. And when we abandon unwholesome thoughts, then we stop generating unwholesome karma through unwholesome deeds and unwholesome speech. So the next part of the verse is about generating wholesome thoughts, unwholesome karma. Because it's the exact opposite of the first sentence. So we start to generate and to maintain, and that's important to realise that we need to try and maintain it. So we think pleasant thoughts. And now one of the ways we do this most often, one of the most common ones, is when we do meditation. This is generating wholesome thoughts. But not only do we generate it, we need to try and maintain it during the day. Because it's so easy to start losing wholesome thoughts during the day, especially when your boss is giving you a hard time. The boss is never happy with how much work you've done. And it's like, the boss wants you to do this, and you go, but I'm about to go on my lunch break. And the boss says, oh, you don't need to have a lunch break, do you? Yeah, I do. And just because the boss takes 2-hour lunches, he thinks you're not entitled to 30 minutes because he needs something done. And all of a sudden, we start to generate unwholesome thoughts towards the boss. We've got to be very, very careful. We need to keep not only generating, but maintaining these wholesome thoughts. So, when the boss starts giving you a hard time, this is where we need to have compassion for the boss. Send some loving kindness out to the boss. True compassion is when we're actually compassionate to those people that we don't like. It's very easy to be compassionate to people who we like. But when we start being compassionate towards the people that we don't like, now we're really starting to practice compassion. And there's an old saying in English that says, love your enemies, it will confuse the heck out of them. And it's so true. So when we maintain wholesome thoughts, then we start to maintain wholesome speech and wholesome deeds. So the things that we start to practice start to become more wholesome and less unwholesome. And so, how do we generate and maintain wholesome actions, wholesome thoughts? By purifying and disciplining our own mind. And the way to do that, of course, is through the practice of meditation. So when we start to meditate, we actually start to see which thoughts are wholesome and which thoughts are unwholesome. And when we see unwholesome thoughts arising, we abandon them. And when we see wholesome thoughts arising, we maintain them and we increase them. And as we continue to practice in this way, you'll see that you get less and less unwholesome thoughts arising and more get me wrong, this doesn't happen overnight. You know, nice if it would. Generally speaking, for most of us, it doesn't take place just overnight. And I always say this is why we call it meditation practice. Because practice makes perfect. You know? We will make mistakes. Unwholesome thoughts, unwholesome speech will come up. And I was thinking about this yesterday, and I only remembered something that a lot of New Zealanders come up with this one. And if somebody says something that we don't like, we just look at them and go, drop dead. What a charming piece of speech to give to anybody. Drop dead. You don't get much more unwholesome than that, you know? And it's like, and it's an everyday speech. It's actually the kind of thing that you would now say to a friend of yours, you know? It's like, oh, I don't think we should go out tonight, I think we should stay in. Oh, drop dead, you know? So we can even say it in a nice voice. We can actually wish somebody to die in a happy voice. You don't get much more unwholesome than that. Where you can tell somebody to die with a smile on your face, you know. And it's because we've gotten so used to this kind of speech. This unwholesome speech has become natural, you know. There's almost a thing in New Zealand that, you know, if we pay a compliment to somebody, they get very suspicious. You know, if somebody goes, you know, like if one of your, you know, if one of my male friends was to go out and buy some new jeans and a new t-shirt, oh yeah, I've got these new threads, what do you think? And if I said, hey, they look really nice, he would actually turn around and go, why, what's wrong with them? If I said they looked like a trash bag, looked like he was dressed up in a trash bag, he would actually take it as a compliment. You know, if I'm nasty to him, that means I'm being nice. If I'm nice to him, it means I'm being nasty. You know, this is the way that society is starting to hardwire itself. You know, when being nasty is nice, and being nice is nasty. So we have to start using wholesome speech. We need to start doing wholesome deeds. And we get these through wholesome thoughts. And these wholesome thoughts we get through purifying the mind. And purifying the mind we get through the practice of meditation. So this is no different today than what it was 2,500 years ago, and however many aeons it was between the various Buddhas, the same advice has been given from one Buddha comes and teaches this way. And the teachings die out eventually, and after some time the next Buddha arises and he teaches the same thing. Abandon unwholesome thoughts. Cultivate wholesome thoughts. Purify the mind. This is the teaching of all the Buddhas. So there's not a lot of change from kalpa to kalpa to kalpa. We still have the same problems. So the next thing we're going to look at is patience. Dhamma, verse 184. Titika kanti paramam kapo, puranivanam paramam vadanti, puru bhagati abhajito nahi hoti param, vehi tayanto samano nahi hoti. Enduring patience is the highest asceticism. The Buddhas say that imperturbable nibbana is the most supreme state. One is not a renunciate if he hurts another. Only one who does not harm others is a true saint, a son of God. In Nikaya 21, as monks, even if bandits were to carve you up savagely, limb by limb, with a two-handled sword, he among you who lets his heart get angered, even at that will not be doing my bidding. Even then you should train yourself. Our minds will be unaffected, and we will say no evil words. We will remain sympathetic with a mind of goodwill and with no inner hate. We will keep pervading these people with an awareness and view with goodwill. Beginning with them, we will keep pervading the all-encompassing world with an awareness and view with goodwill. Abundant, expansive, immeasurable, free from hostility, free from ill will. That's how you should train yourselves. Monks, if you attend constantly to this admonition of the simile of the sword, do you see any aspects of speech, slight or gross, that you would not endure? No, Lord. Then attend constantly to this admonition on the simile of the sword. That will be for your long-term welfare and happiness. This is what the Blessed One said. Gratified the monks, delighted in the blessed word. So we can see here that there's a great big stress on patience. You know, we so easily get angry because somebody says something to us that we don't like, you know. And you're at work, you're doing the job, and somebody says, "Oh, why are you so slow?" How dare they call me slow? And then you get angry, you start to verbally abuse them. Maybe we even lash out with our fists because we don't like what somebody says to us. Because we don't have patience. We just very quickly react. And often, as I say, sometimes when people are not being nice to us, it means they've got a problem in their life. Something is not right in their life. And unfortunately, sometimes we just happen to be the closest person to them. When they react to whatever it is that's been making them unhappy, and they take it out on others, and we just happen to be close by. We need to be patient with these people, and we have to understand that they're having a bad hair day, and we can let it go. We've all done it ourselves because we've been upset by something that's happening in our home life or something like that, and somebody speaks to us and we just tell them off. We say something nasty to them. We regret it afterwards, but we've already done it. And so if we know that we can do this, and we would hope people would forgive us for what we said in a fit of anger, we should be able to forgive that person and not react against what it is they're saying. So how do we practice patience? We've got to get rid of restlessness and aversion in the mind. And this can only be done through meditation. The problem is, we often get impatient with our meditation practice. very thing that we're trying to use to get rid of impatience, we get impatient with. You know, you get these people, they come and they do a 10-day meditation retreat. So they figure day 1, first jhana, day 2, second jhana, and so on and so forth. And they figure that by the end of the retreat they should be an arahant, because they've been there for 10 days. And it doesn't work like that. And we get very, very impatient with our practice. And the problem is, you see, we sit down and we think, I'm going to get some tranquility. And we have very little meditation practice behind us. And we think we're going to sit down and we're going to get a tranquil mind. Mind doesn't work like that. Our minds have been playing for so long. Even in this lifetime, our minds have been allowed to wander, have been allowed to do whatever it is that they want to do. And now we're trying to get our minds to sit quietly in one place. And our mind, it's a bit like children, really. You know, if you've got children and your child has been outside playing all day with his friends, running here and there and climbing trees and jumping in the sandpit and going on the slide and the seesaws, all over the place, having a wonderful time. And then you turn around and you go, wait, time for you to come inside and sit down and be quiet now. But the child doesn't want to come and sit down and be quiet. The child wants to play. That's what it's been doing. And it doesn't need you to try and stop it from playing. And our mind is exactly the same. It's been playing for so long. And it really doesn't like the idea of you telling it to sit down and be quiet. And so we have to persevere with this mind. We have to have the patience to sit there while the mind keeps rebelling against everything that we're attempting to do. And we know how difficult this is. You know, we sit down, okay, I'm just going to be aware of the in and out breath. Just for 10 minutes I'm going to sit here and I'm going to be aware of the in-breath and I'm going to be aware of the out-breath. 10 minutes, easy, no time at all. Yeah, can't even get 10 seconds, right? The mind takes off, it's gone out there, it's gone over, you know? Because that's the nature of the mind. It's always done it. And so, you know, we sit there and we get a couple of seconds and then the mind wanders. And sometimes it takes us a few minutes to even realise that the mind's wandered. So then we bring it back. And sometimes we get angry with it. And one of the things we do, one of the reasons we meditate is to get rid of anger. And yet we get angry during our meditation. So when we see that our mind has actually wandered off, we just bring it back to its object of meditation. So if you're watching the breath, you're just like, okay, my mind's out here, I'm just going to bring it back now. And you bring it back gently. You bring it back lovingly. And then you see if you can stay for another couple of seconds on the breath before it takes off again. When it does, again we bring it back. So we're practicing patience right here, you know. And when we can sit patiently, eventually the fruits will start to fall into our laps. But often we get restless. Meditation's not working. We're not getting the tranquility. We're not going to attain jhana in this particular session, so we get up. We abandon the meditation. You abandon the meditation, you're never ever going to get anywhere. We need to be patient in the practice. And there are practical ways that we can be patient. Like, when you're driving in your car, occasionally here in Kuala Lumpur, sometimes you get a little bit of heavyish traffic. You're not moving quite as quickly as you might like to be. And try getting out of the city centre at 5 o'clock at night. You don't do it that quickly. And then we start to get very, very impatient. I've seen cars trying to change lanes, and you speed up to stop it getting in. There's my space. If you jump in front of me, I'm going to lose 2 seconds on my journey. So you'll make that guy sit in the middle of another lane. You're not going to let him come into your lane, no matter what. I had a girlfriend years ago, and we'd be out in the car, and we'd come to a traffic light, the lights would be red, and there'd be a car in front of us. So you're sitting there waiting for the light to turn green, and it would go green, and the car in front wouldn't take off immediately. There wouldn't be a nanoseconds difference between green light car move. And my girlfriend should be leaning over trying to honk the horn. What are you doing? She's like, beat the horn. It's like, no. Give the driver the opportunity to shift into first gear, release the clutch and pull away. But she was so impatient. It's like, but the light's been green for 2 seconds. But we like this. So we can start practicing patience by, when we're out in the car, try not to hit the horn too often. The horn of your car should be used as a warning device. And so the car might not actually see you coming and start to pull across, then you can beep your horn to let the driver know that you're actually there. You're going to prevent an accident. But just because the driver doesn't pull off quickly enough from the traffic light, leave the horn alone. If somebody's trying to change lanes, let them come in front of you. In actual fact, if more people did that, you'd have a better flow of traffic. Because half the problem with your traffic is cars starting to block things up because they won't be let in by the drivers. We would actually have, and that's not just here in Malaysia, that's all over the world. We just don't want to give an inch. We have no patience for anybody. And so we can start practicing patience out there on the road. You see it when somebody cuts in a line, when you're going to the bank or something, when you're very angry with people. I've got time. It's going to hold me up for 2 or 3 minutes, this person jumping in the queue. I've got time. I'm not going to get impatient with this person. And so we start to practice patience outside the meditation. And we take the practice of patience into the meditation. And then, when that happens, we will find that the people that are hurting us, we become more patient with them too. We're able to let it go. Because when we don't let it go, we create non-virtuous karma for ourselves. Non-wholesome karma. And if somebody does something out of ignorance to us, we know that they're doing it out of ignorance, so we have compassion for them. But when we get angry, then we now have created non-virtuous karma for ourselves. So we need to start practicing some patience. So the third one is noble guidelines. Anupavado, Anupagato, Padimoti, Samaro, Chavatasmin, Nadnyuta, Chavapantam, Sayamasana, Cha Adichite, Ayoga, Chevitam, Buddhana, Sasana. To refrain from finding fault with others, to refrain from hurting others, to to be trained in the highest forms of discipline and conduct, to be moderate in food, to take delight in solitude, and to engage in higher thought, which is meditation, constantly. This is the teaching of all the Buddhas. And we find it very easy to find fault, to criticize other people. We're very good at it. And we're often very slow to see our own faults. And they reckon a lot of times the faults that we see in other people are actually the faults that we have in ourselves. We just see it reflected in others, and the tendency to then criticize them. And we do it all the time. So quick to find fault with other people. So we need to, rather than criticizing others for their faults, we turn our thoughts inwards and we see what it is that needs to be changed in us, as opposed to what needs to be changed in others. Not hurting others, which is what we do through our speech, what we do through our deeds. So we need to practice wholesome speech and wholesome deeds. And so it's very, very easy to lash out. There's that, I don't know if you have it here, but like we've got that saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. Yeah, they do. Some of the things that we say to other people hurt them. And we see it with parents. I shudder sometimes, because you get a group of adults sitting together and there's a little child, 4, 5, 6 years old or whatever, sitting in the room. And mum's sitting there going, oh, he's actually quite thick. He's really quite a stupid child. He's never going to get anywhere in life. I was like, the kid is in the room. He's listening to this, and it creates harm. I was saying the other day, there was something I saw. It was a young kid in the States, about 14 years old, and people started posting, I don't know, on Facebook or on Twitter or one of these social things, that this kid was gay. And there was all this stuff about this kid being gay, this kid. He committed suicide. 14 years old. Names can hurt people. The tongue is a very, very powerful weapon. But we can use the tongue for unwholesome things, or we can use the tongue for wholesome things. I was saying yesterday, when I was a young fellow, and I'm pretty sure I was in primary school, probably about 9 or 10 years old, and our teacher had us all sitting together, I can't remember if we're in a circle or whatever, and she's going, right, turn to the person next to you and say something nasty to them. And so, he said something nasty to the person. And the teacher was just watching. And then afterwards she said, right, I want you to turn to the person and say something nice to them. So we turned and started saying nice things to them. And she pointed out that even though we knew that this was just a lesson in the classroom, so that we knew that like the nasty thing that the person beside us was saying, they didn't really mean. I mean, when you're that old, you have a tendency to sit next to your best friends anyhow, But she pointed out that when nasty things were being said, all of us dropped our shoulders down. She said, when they said nice things about us, we all started to sit up straight and to bring our shoulders back. You know? So even though it was just a thing amongst friends, there was a reaction took place. You know? So we can see that words can be very harmful or they can be very good. And so we need to guard our tongues in a good way. And of course we understand that, you know, hitting people is not a good thing at the best of times. I mean, although I was saying to somebody the other day that, you know, there are times you might actually hurt somebody to save them from a situation. Like if you see a baby about to stick a knitting needle into the wall socket, and you might have a book, you know, you're not going to be able to reach the child quickly enough. So you chuck a big book and hit the kid with the book and it's not able to stick with him. You know, that's hurting the child with a virtuous intent, you know, when the child's electrocuted himself. But we know so often we just strike out. You know, I used to use my fists and my feet all the time. I used to actually enjoy using my fists and my feet. I enjoyed hurting other people. And we need to stop doing this. And we need to train ourselves in the higher forms of conduct and discipline. And so we do this by listening to the Dhamma. And I keep saying, people are going to start saying there's monkeys banging on about this. But I'm talking about listening to the true Dhamma. There's a lot of watered down Dhamma out there. We have to be very careful that we're not listening to watered down Dhamma. I'm not going to tell you things just to make you feel good. Hopefully what I tell you makes you feel good. But you know, there's a lot of people out there who are prepared not to teach the true Dhamma because some people don't like everything that's in the Dhamma. So we need to listen to the Dhamma. But not only do we need to listen to the Dhamma, we need to begin to practice the Dhamma. And we need to take the Dhamma and to put it into our everyday usage. It's not just about coming to a temple once a week, twice a week, listening to a talk. But those things that we know, that we've heard, we know are wholesome, and that if we put into practice will only lead to wholesomeness, then we can put it into practice in our everyday lives. And when we start to do this, you'll find that, somebody said to me the other day, they said, how do we stop our children being converted? And it's like, we need to practice the Dhamma according to the Dhamma. That's the first thing we need to do, is let our children see that we practice according to the Dhamma. And in that way we have a better chance of keeping our children interested in the Dhamma. And these people who are running around proselytizing and trying to show the easy way won't be able to get their foot in the door. When the children see that the parents are practicing the Dhamma according to the Dhamma, then you've got a better chance of getting your kids to understand. You know, it's like, I know some of you might have heard me say once, when I was about 13 and I was starting to do my drug taking. And at that stage it was just marijuana, you know, I wasn't going totally crazy. And I remember sitting, I was in the lounge one day, and my stepfather was there. And he had a large bottle of beer in one hand, you know, 750 milliliter bottle of beer, and a cigarette in the other hand. And he was lecturing me on the evils of drugs. Yeah, I'm really going to listen to a man with a smoke and a beer telling me how stupid it is to take drugs, you know. So when we want our children to be interested in the Dhamma, we have to be the ones who are showing the children the Dhamma. And so we have to be practicing the Dhamma in our everyday lives. You know, we have to show the children what it means to be a Buddhist. And of course, taking delight in solitude. You know, we can't always run off to the forest, you know, and sit at the foot of a tree. So what we do is we find a quiet place in the home, a quiet time in the home. Not easy for those of you with young children to find a quiet time in the home, I know, but you know, we do our best to find a quiet place, a quiet time. We turn off the phone, we turn off the radio, we turn off the television set. We let the family members know we don't want to be disturbed for 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Just ask them to respect that little piece of time. And then we can just sit down and start the practice of meditation. So this is the teachings of all the Buddhas. So, are there any questions or any comments? That's going to depend very much on the circumstances. You know, the Buddha tells us that we have to be very careful of our speech. Now, what we say might be correct, but we need to know the right time to speak out. You know? Sometimes it can be correct, but it might not be conducive at that particular point in time. And so you're going to have to try and work out whether or not what you say, because sometimes you could actually say something to somebody and they're going to hit you. You know, this is a possibility that, you know. But yeah, we get into situations like, you know, if you see somebody beating somebody else up, you know, it's like you should actually try to stop that person beating the other person up. And of course you could wind up getting beat up yourself as a result of it, you know. So it becomes very, very difficult. But we have to be able to choose the right time and to know the right words, you know. Sometimes you don't want to just come out and say, well, that's wrong, you shouldn't be doing it. Sometimes it might be better off asking them whether or not they think that's a right thing to do, as opposed to accusing them of doing a wrong thing. You know? Then they can answer the question for themselves, or they can go away and ponder the question that you gave them. But if you just tell them it's wrong, then they just take offence. You know? So we have to be very careful. You know? Of course, you can do it if you've got friends who you know are Dhamma friends. It's a lot easier to tell a Dhamma friend that's like, whoa, you know, are you sure the Buddha would be recommending that kind of behaviour? But again, you put it as a question. So then they have to stop and think about, you know, what will the Buddha do? What will the Buddha say? You know? So we do have to be very careful about how we deal with situations. So often we see people doing something wrong. But I mean, like, if you walk into a bank and, you know, there's a guy standing there with a shotgun holding the bank up, it's probably best to keep quiet. He knows what he's doing is wrong anyhow, you know, you're just going to get into trouble. You know, you're just going to take your handbag and see if you've got any money in your purse. So, you know, you've got to pick your times. You really got to use a little bit of intelligence when it comes to what to say, when to say it. Because often it's not what you say, it's how you say it as well. You know? Well, other times it's not necessarily what you say, but it's how somebody else perceives what it is that you said. So you've really got to watch the time, you know? Especially if somebody's very angry. You know, it's not always easy to deal rationally with an angry person. Sometimes you've got to let the anger in that person subside. And then you can go up and talk about what it was that made them so angry, and then help them understand what happens with anger and how they can deal with it, stuff like that. Any questions?
This is our interest. This morning we're discussing about heaven. Is a Christian heaven the same as Buddhist heaven, the same as the Hindu heaven, all the heavens that all the religious creatures? Thank you.
Are all the heavens the same? From a Buddhist perspective, yes. Because from a Buddhist perspective, I'd say they're all impermanent. From a Christian perspective, no. Because a Christian would say it's permanent. I think we have the same idea. You know, whether you're a Christian or a Jew, a Muslim, or even a Buddhist, and some Buddhists have a thing about wanting to go to heaven. So, in all of these things, heaven is a reward for good behaviour, and heaven is a place of no suffering. You know, it's always, of course, in Buddhism we understand that, because it's impermanent, it is suffering. But even the devas, if you read through the sutras, it's not until a deva is coming towards the end of its time that the deva actually starts to suffer in the heavenly realms. It says the gardens start to wither, sweat comes from the armpits, the clothes get soiled. All these signs start to come about as a deva is about to leave the heavenly realms. But for the rest of the time, the devas really, really enjoy themselves. Great luxury, everything is there, whatever they wish for, they can have it, And so the concepts of heaven are exactly the same. And so in a way, I'd have to say yes, the heavens are the same, because the heavens are what we think the heavens are. And, Christianity talks about a place of no suffering, And Judaism talks about a place of no suffering. The Quran talks about a place of no suffering. So in that way, they are all the same. But as a Buddhist, I would say yes, they're not permanent. But then, of course, people of other religions would say that they are a permanent place. So there would be many differences in how we view heaven. Does that make sense? No. You have to understand that, as I say, the theistic religions have a heaven, they have a hell. Now, the thing is, even within the Christian community, we've got so many, we talk about Catholics and Protestants, but then, even amongst that lot, there's a whole bunch of different types, like in the Protestant church, you have the Anglican church, you have the Methodist church, you have this, so many, and of course, you often hear people in the Protestant church, or what they call the Christian church, because they tend to say that Catholics aren't Christians for some reason. Well, they say that Catholics won't be going to heaven. And of course, you've got the Catholics and the Protestants won't be going to heaven. And yet, as far as I can make out, they're worshipping the same God. You know? And of course, the Catholics and the Protestants will say that the Jews aren't going to heaven because the Jews don't have Jesus. The Jews, they're the only ones that are going to go to heaven. And if their heaven exists, they're going to be in for a heck of a shock when they start to realise that, you know, it's the same heaven, it's the same God. So they'll be in for a heck of a surprise, these people, you know. And as I say, as a Buddhist, you know, we don't see heaven as a place of, it's not a permanent abode, you know. It's a place where we reside for a certain length of time, and then we either come back down out of the heavenly realms, or, you know, if you're a non-returner, you'll attain enlightenment in the heavenly realm, attaining Dhamma. So even for the non-returner, the heavenly realm is not a permanent place. It's just the last place that they reside before they're actually attaining the Dhamma. Any more questions?
Concerning the issue of modernization, I'd like to ask whether the recognition of the Bhikkhuni order by some monks from outside Thailand, Sri Lanka, and the Caribbean countries, is this considered modernization of Buddhism, or is it considered going back to the ancient times where the four assemblies were recognized? That's my first question. My second question is concerning the cultivation of crops by monks, which is, according to Theravada traditions, against denial. But in countries like China, where it's the monks, they go and live in the very rural areas, a certain periods of the history of China where the monks were persecuted by the kings themselves, actually, and they have to run deep into the jungle to practice, and they can't rely on alms food, so they have to plant their own crops and self-survive on their own. So is that skillful means to an end, like while waiting for the bad period to be over, or is it really something that is against the denial?
Okay, I'll answer the second question first. First of all, we're talking about the Mahayana tradition, but putting aside which tradition we're discussing, we have to remember that we have different Vinayas anyhow. Now that could be based upon what you said, like, you know, if you're being persecuted by a king and you've had to run off into the wilderness, which would quite possibly reshape your whole Vinaya. I would say that would be skillful means. You know, the Buddha doesn't expect the monks to starve to death. Monks starve to death, you actually have no monks to continue the tradition on. And so I would say yes, under those circumstances, the monks would probably be better off. If they can't forage and find enough food, then it might be better for them to start turning the ground, to start growing their own food, to start cooking their own food. You know? And as you said, hoping that eventually the situation will change and they can go back to the normal way. If the situation doesn't change, they will just continue to do it. I know in the Zen tradition, a lot of the monasteries in Japan, for instance, the monks do grow their own vegetables. But again, they have a different Vinaya, so I can't make a judgment on those guys. But yes, I would say that there would certainly be instances, and as I said, like with the monks in Europe who wear shoes when on arms rounds, you've got to have a certain amount of flexibility, but it's not just, I don't like this rule, so I'm going to get rid of it, I'm going to change it, you know. But under certain circumstances, you'll find that it's probably necessary to, you know, maybe put the rule aside for a certain period of time, or dispose of the rule completely depending upon the circumstances. As to the first question, bikini ordination. For the record, I am a supporter of the reintroduction of the bikini lineage, so my answer might be biased. I don't believe it's a modernization. The bikini tradition died out and it was reintroduced in India back in the 1990s. Yes, we used Chinese bikinis, and so people say that it's not a correct ordination because they say the Chinese bikinis aren't Theravada. However, the Chinese bikinis can actually take their lineage back to the Theravada lineage. Now, you know, I've done a lot of study. Well, I haven't done the study, I've read the results of the studies, and I'm quite satisfied that even if the Chinese preceptor was incorrect in the way that she precepted, she gave the nuns the higher ordination. According to the Vinaya, she is at fault, but the people she ordained are ordained. They have no fault. They believed that they were being ordained correctly, according to the rules. And according to the Vinaya, their ordination stands. And so they are correctly ordained bhikkhunis. And the precept that if she did something wrong, all she has to do is confess it, that she did something wrong. The other day I found myself in a situation. There was a lady here at the temple who required a little bit of counselling. And I had to be very cautious as a bhikkhu where I can talk to this lady because of the Vinaya. The Vinaya cautions monks about where they can and where they can't speak with a woman. Now, she wanted to discuss family issues that she was having. And they're private issues, you know. And yet I couldn't actually take her to a private place to discuss it. Not that I would have really cared, but you know, there was actually no private place at the time. You know, the wisdom room had people, I don't know who there. But basically, I sat in a fairly public area, away from people, but I was visible, you know, and people could walk close by and could see that there was the discussion was not about, you know, oh, you're looking very cute today. The discussion wasn't being inappropriate. If we had bikinis here, I could have handed it to a bikini and said, please take this lady away somewhere and talk to her. You know? Not having bikinis actually creates a problem. So I am so thankful that the tradition is coming back, because the bikinis can be of such a great help in the Sangha. You know, so I'm really, really pleased myself that they have started to reordain, and it's growing. You know, it's growing. It's getting bigger and bigger in Sri Lanka. I believe there's about 1,000 in Thailand, and of course the West, because it was Ajahn Brahm who caused the big stink in the West when he started ordaining over there. And so, I'm very, very pleased, and I think that it needed to be reintroduced. Because this is the thing, people say modernise Buddhism, but then the minute I try and go and sit privately with a woman, some everybody, you shouldn't be doing that, he's a monk. So it's like, yeah, absolutely, I shouldn't be doing that. But where are the female monks? Where are the nuns to help me? And so when we start to get them back, they're going to be of great benefit for the propagation of the Dhamma. And technically speaking, I'm not even allowed to sit alone discussing Dhamma with a woman. There should be a male old enough and with the intellect to know what it is that we're discussing. Well, that can be a bit difficult for me. Some woman says, Bhante, I was reading this in the suttas. Could you explain to me what it says? Oh yeah, hang on a minute, I'll just go and get a bloke. I should be able to just, be able to talk to her, but because the Vinaya says I can't because of incidents that happened in the time of the Buddha, I either ignore that part of the Vinaya, which I've done quite often, don't get me wrong, I've got no problem sitting down and discussing the Dhamma with a woman. But, what happens is lay people can see me doing it. Well, what's that monk up to? What's he talking to that lady about? And this is why we sometimes have to be very cautious. If we had bikinis, we wouldn't have to, we could throw caution to the wind. We could just say, there you go. There's a nun, go and have a chat. So, I'm pleased that it was reintroduced. We have gone back. We now have the fourfold Sangha that the Buddha discussed. On the night of his enlightenment, he discussed the fourfold Sangha. Because the old Mara tried to get him just to, either go and hang out in the forest or die. One of the two, you've done what you wanted to do. And the Buddha said, not until my fourfold Sangha has been established. On the night of his Parinirvana, the Buddha spoke about, I have established my fourfold Sangha. And I am very, very happy to see that the fourfold Sangha has come back into being.
You say that the Bhante has been sharing with us a lot of pointers, and as a learning session today, we want a lot of questions to discuss. This has around us about Bhante has been sharing us today about the